Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Evangeline Berube, and I'm the branch manager of our senior level consulting practice in Edmonton, Management Resources. We are very excited to be hosting this webinar, and a big thank you to all of you for joining us today. Through our discussion, we're going to be looking to explore the evolving role of the CFO and digging into what CFOs need to address as organizations of all sizes continue to face challenges and opportunities, and to strive not only to preserve, but optimize their financial performance now and in the future. Like many of you, I've been thinking a lot about the unprecedented period of economic uncertainty that we are in, and what today's rapidly changing business landscape means for today's CFO. In recent years, we have seen a shift in what was once considered the traditional duties of this role in order to accommodate new and ever-growing demands. Responsibilities such as safeguarding assets, cash flow management, understanding and managing risk, financial reporting, interpreting performance, and general financial planning and analysis have really been standard requirements for some time. However, we are now seeing, in addition to these areas, that the expertise needed to design and drive company strategy, foster a strong organizational culture, and ensure operational resilience and efficiency has also become very critical. CFOs have become more diversified and multidisciplined than ever before. And this is largely based on them working hand in hand with CEOs to understand the underlying issues, trends, and opportunities behind the numbers, and how they impact business and growth, new product development, operations and investment, technology transformation, and talent oversight. An example of this is a survey conducted by an Adaptive Insight, which showed that more than half of CFO respondents said their jobs include strategic business analysis. And when you start looking at larger companies with over 1 billion in revenues, business strategy becomes actually a priority for 70% of CFOs. A Robert Half Management Resources survey also found that more than 77% of CFOs are collaborating with their CIOs more frequently today than in recent years, and that 36% of financial leaders worked in business development before becoming a CFO. Many also have held administrative level roles at 35%, human resource roles also at 35%, and technology roles at 33%, with only 14% of survey respondents reporting that they've worked exclusively in accounting and finance during their career. So what does the rest of 2020 and beyond look like for today's multifaceted CFO? According to Robert Half partner Protiviti, CFOs are prioritizing cash, sustainability, and while maybe a little bit of clairvoyance as well. Along with managing liquidity and addressing expanding investor expectations, finance leaders are looking into the post-COVID-19 future to help identify foundational investments that will help right-size finance organizations while equipping them with the resilience, talent, technology, and virtual operating capabilities needed to thrive amid ongoing disruptions. The global pandemic also continues to impact budgeting and planning activities as finance teams strive to forecast, reforecast, and repeat while dealing with the market realities that are driving a sea of change as organizations rebuild or reimagine their businesses, all of which, pardon me, which will influence budgets significantly. From technology standpoint, in recent months, many business leaders have also acknowledged that their organization's pre-pandemic technology planning did not embrace a sufficiently robust strategy. And while many organizations performed admirably under the circumstances, there is a growing recognition that the effort required to do so is just not sustainable. And finally, From identifying 2021 investments that will help companies operate more effectively and efficiently, to accessing the potential people, process, and technology investments required for organizations to thrive during the current pandemic or in response to future disruptions, it is clear that the role and the influence of the CFO will only continue to grow. Now, to help us dive deeper into this discussion, I would now like to introduce our roundtable panelists. Before we get started, I wanted to share a couple of quick points related to the format of today's webinar. We have designated time for questions at the end, but in case time constraints don't allow us to get to every question, please type them into the chat box. You'll see that at the bottom of your screen. And we will do our best to send out a summary and highlight a few key questions following the webinar. So now, without further ado, please meet our illustrious roundtable participants. First, Mike Boris, CFO, AutoCanada. Michelle Beck, Vice President of Corporate Services and Finance, Northwest College. Colleen Purdy, CFO, Alberta Health Services. And Carolyn Graham, EVP and CFO, CWB Financial Group. Welcome, and we look forward to your insights. So I would now like to invite each participant to share a bit about their organization and summarize their thoughts on today's topic. Mike, would you like to start us off?
And okay, I'm not muted anymore. So good morning, everyone. I'm Mike Boris. I've been CFO with AutoCanada for just over a year, having joined in August of 2019. I was doing the commute from Calgary for the first 6 months, and the family moved at the beginning of March when just about everyone was locked down with COVID-19. So interesting times for the family, for sure, as we were moving into the house. Prior to AutoCanada, I've had CFO positions with restaurants, KFC, Pizza Hut, and Taco Bell. I was the country CFO when Pepsi owned those restaurants. And then theaters with Famous Players, and worked the team that sold Famous Players to Cineplex in 2005, and then shifted to retail with the Brick in Edmonton back in 2005. I'd always wanted to be CFO of a public company. And that was my first experience being CFO for a pubco. And then went from that to oil and gas with New Alta, my next public company, where I'd say I learned a ton more on all fronts of the business. And I was there for about 10 years. We talk about the role and evolution of the CFO. So first I'll say, based on my experiences in moving around, I see being a CFO as a plug and play role. And I don't mean that in a bad way. We can move from industry to industry as long as we keep our eye on the fundamental priorities of the role of CFO, which I think we'll get into later on with the questions. But with every role, the mandate at the outset will likely be a little different. Could be about building a stronger team, could be about building culture. When I think back to joining Famous Players, the CEO hired me to help build culture there. Being a partner to the CEO or to the executive team, fixing the balance sheet, or some variation of the above. The interesting piece about AutoCanada is that this is a bit of a reboot, what I'll call AutoCanada 2.0. The company had made a bad acquisition in early 2018, and I can say that because I think the whole market knows that. Much of the board and the executive management team turned over around that time, so that it made this a little bit more interesting. Thinking back a year ago, the issue was primarily about bringing public company experience to the new management team and fixing the balance sheet. We were highly leveraged after that acquisition. I'll be mindful of time here as I recount the early months, but the experiences absolutely speak to what a CFO is all about. Setting financing strategy or financial strategy, driving for liquidity, improving communications to the street, the board, and other stakeholders, and managing risk. And in this case, I'll speak to market risk. My immediate focus upon joining August of 2019 was about getting our debt level down, with a view to addressing our pending near-term maturities associated with the syndicated credit facility and our $150 million unsecured debenture. As people described it here, we were coming up against a brick wall. I'm not sure we were using those words publicly. Within a short period of time, we developed a roadmap of actions required to get in front of all of us, meeting with our various investment bankers to align on the right strategy, meeting with our credit facility bankers to establish a relationship and to better understand the challenges, understanding what our rating challenges were with respect to the debenture. And then we also had to figure out how to generate cash from the balance sheet. And to any new or aspiring CFO listening, you'll learn that there tends to be a ton of value in most balance sheets. And in our case, working capital. And so for a dealership group, working capital is about, or predominantly about floor plan debt, which doesn't count as what I'll call real debt or bank debt, but rather as a trade payable. And then you have the regular AR and AP and inventory items and other stuff that fall into working capital. So I'll skip through a lot of the detail, but suffice to say, I was super proud of the team here and how we worked together to identify the opportunities and to go after it collectively. Managing working capital, we identified about 25 million of opportunity for Q3, and we pretty much achieved a little over that amount to pay down debt. And with strong operating performance to complement the cash, the market reacted positively. We continued to work the opportunity, and in Q4, we drove another $45 to $50 million working capital to reduce debt. That helped us to be re-rated positively by S&P. So S&P was our rating agency. We earned that much more credibility with our lenders while we were doing all of that and with the market. And jumping to the punchline, we renewed a 3-year credit facility and refinanced our debenture for $125 million and a 5-year term and a pretty good interest rate for us at the time. It was exactly what we would have mapped out 4 to 5 months earlier, and we got there. And as luck would, there's always a bit of luck here. So, and as luck would have it, we did it all just before the full onset of COVID. And that's where I kind of bring in market risk, because we were very conscious of doing this as quickly as we can, not knowing what we could predict for Q1 or Q2 into 2020. And as it turned out, speed and how we did it was exactly what we needed to do. So the work we did in that 4 to 5 month period allowed us to move through what we hope will be the worst of COVID-19, but we're always prepared. We entered the pandemic with the strongest of balance sheets in recent times. Our share price is over 50% from the start of the year and over 200% from the March lows post-COVID. And we've moved from working defense to working offense. So we've been very happy with how all parts of the business have managed the business model over these past 12 months. And that's my time. That's my story.
Thank you very much, Mike. And that is a good news story. And we look forward to digging into that more as you talk about some of the priorities that the CFOs need to demonstrate and act on. So thank you again. Michelle, did you want to share some insights?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you. I'm joining everyone today from Norquest College. I am proud to work for Norquest College in Edmonton, where I'm a post-secondary college with about 20,000 learners. And our learners take diploma programs and certificates and micro-credentialing and non-credit programs. We primarily focus on frontline workers. So you'll find a lot of our graduates in hospitals and in a variety of different places as you go in your everyday life, actually. So really proud to work for Norquest, and certainly in an ever-changing post-secondary environment in Alberta. It's been an interesting year. I've been at Norquest for a year. A little bit about me. I'm a mom, a wife, a daughter. I live very close to my family in Edmonton. And I have, this topic is so timely and so interesting to me personally. And I think about my own personal career, about sort of intentionally getting into a variety of different industries, from transportation to banking, even small businesses, food services. I actually intentionally took a little bit of time between jobs, and I wanted to know what it felt like to volunteer all of my time for no pay. What does that feel like? Because, you know, I generally volunteer time as part of life and as I'm working, but I've never not worked and volunteered 100% of my time. What does that feel like? And spend a bit of time in small business as well. I think from just a little bit more background around me from a career perspective, I've thoroughly enjoyed being in all types of typical finance roles over time. And I say the word typical intentionally because I think the environment and other folks have an idea of what typical finance is, but I think we senior finance people understand that there's a variety of different things, including I've had IT and I have IT today. Facilities, risk has been a great experience for me over my career. Strategic planning and corporate performance management was fun and is fun. Business intelligence and analytics is also an area that I've played quite heavily in and still do. And I would say one of my more interesting jumps was into senior human resources in a bank. So coming right out of finance and taking a 4-year vice president people and culture position in a bank, which was quite a stretch, but love it. Wouldn't have changed it for the world. Coming back into corporate services and finance with Norquest, it just lends that much more experience to strategic thinking, I think. So that's a little bit about me, and I'd love to share more about Norquest's story and mine as time goes on, and I'll turn the time over to a fellow panelist. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And, you know, again, kind of further to what we saw with Mike's story, we're, you know, seeing that progression and working in different industries. And you, you know, kind of further to some of the stats I shared, you actually being in a human resource role and then going back to finance. So we've definitely seen that as part of our surveys. So very interesting. So thank you for sharing that. And Colleen, would you like to share some insights?
Yes, I would love to. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, so I'm now with Alberta Health Services and have been with Alberta Health Services as the Vice President Corporate Services and Chief Financial Officer since July. So I'm just not quite 90 days in yet, but I am coming to Alberta Health Services having worked in healthcare previously. So I will do a little bit about me and how I got here. I grew up in Saskatchewan. I've been in Alberta now for over 30 years. Had my accounting diploma through STI and then went on to get my CMA designation. What I will say, Mike, which is interesting, is I started my accounting career in the car business or in the automotive industry with car dealerships. And when I first came to Edmonton, it was with Denny Andrews Ford, and was in the automotive industry and loved every bit of it. Grew up in it. My father had a car dealership. So, but what I would say is in getting my accounting designation at the time, and I won't say how long ago now, but really needed management experience. And to get that in a car dealership setting was likely not going to happen. So made a jump to healthcare. And always intended I would go back to the automotive industry, but healthcare was really interesting, and I spent 18 years in healthcare, starting out in acute care and then working as the industry changed and the province started doing regional health authorities. The regional health authority merges long-term care, acute care, public health. Every piece of the healthcare business that's out there is what you needed to learn when you were working for a regional health authority. So did that for 18 years and worked my way up from, I started out as the senior accountant in receivables and ended up, by the time I was leaving healthcare, I was the senior financial officer for Capital Health, and moved on from there into banking. And so it's really interesting the tie that we have in this panel. So worked for ATB Financial for almost 11 years and loved every minute of it. Loved them as an organization and started out as corporate controller. And what I would say about banking is it has very complicated accounting compared to healthcare. The accounting is less complicated, but banking does have some complicated accounting, and really diving in and becoming the controller and learning that goes back to that traditional role of an accountant. But moved on after about 8 years as controller into roles that were more about business support, financial planning, strategic planning, and had the opportunity, as Michelle talked about, taking on a role for the last year that I was at ATB that was very much in the IT side of the world and not in the accounting side at all, and looking at launching a digital banking app that we call Brightside. It's great. If you don't have it yet, you should try and sign up for it. And so did that in my last year and learned a lot on the IT side of the world from that. And then now started back with Alberta Health Services as their VP Corporate Services and Chief Financial Officer. I do have corporate performance and planning. So I do have that strategic planning side of things underneath me in this role. I also have supply chain. And so for an organization the size of Alberta Health Services, so we do have an operating budget that is about $15 billion and 104,000 employees, and we supply across the province. So supply chain is not small for Alberta Health Services. I also have capital management and planning. So maintaining the buildings, building new buildings, that falls underneath my purview, as well as the corporate finance side of the world and forecasting. So for Alberta Health Services, it's very interesting. It's a known item that we have a review that was done recently, and Alberta spends more per capita on healthcare than some of our other provincial counterparts. And so we are looking very carefully at all the spending that happens within Alberta Health Services and what can we do different. And that review was underway just before the pandemic coming along. And we are, I would say, got a bit sidetracked with the pandemic, but we are coming back to it and reviewing what we can do different to still provide the right care for people and quality health care, but maybe at a bit of a different price. And we also have an ongoing pandemic underway. So it's very interesting times for Alberta Health Services. The organization needed to do a lot to respond to this pandemic. And as we move through the next months, and hopefully not years, but maybe, we have to figure out how we continue to provide what we need to do from a health response to a pandemic, at the same time as carrying on health services for the province. And I think I'll stop there. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Pauline. Yes, a big portfolio and big task. Certainly Alberta Health Services front and center in the pandemic right now. But also, interestingly enough, you mentioning you kind of steered into the technology realm. So you were part of the 33% of respondents that we would have spoken to that had gone that route versus like the human resource route that Michelle referenced. So so interesting. Thank you so much for sharing. And Carolyn, love to hear you.
Thanks, Evangeline. Good morning, everyone. And thanks to Robert Half for bringing us together today to have this conversation that I know will be interesting. My backstory might feel a bit traditional and perhaps straight path. So I, born and bred Alberta girl, grew up in Northern Alberta, came to Edmonton to pursue a Bachelor of Commerce from the Alberta School of Business. So proud alumni there. Started articling with Deloitte after my third year in what was then a bit of a co-op or intern program. Ended up staying for 15. So really found the breadth of clients and businesses that I gained exposure to be really worthwhile for me. 20 years ago, moved to Canadian Western Bank, which is a commercially focused, federally regulated Schedule I bank. So like the 6 big banks in the country that we all know of. We focus on serving business owner clients across the country from our head office at Edmonton. And when I started, essentially I was the controller of a very small little trust company. Within the group, which was about $2 billion, a $2 billion balance sheet then. The benefit to having that little tiny trust company was that I got to learn banking from all aspects, but at a very small scale. So I really got to roll up my sleeves and understand the components of what made that business successful. 20 years later, the bank has grown to be a $30 billion business. I've had a great opportunity to grow and develop and take on new challenges with the same organization, but never feeling like it was getting bored or stale. So working on cross-functional projects, a lot of M&A activities, both through the due diligence process and then through integration. So you learn a lot of things as you unwind or tuck in organizations and think about how to make them work. I was appointed CFO almost exactly 6 years ago. And so if we think back in Alberta, just in time for the price of oil to plummet, Alberta to go into recession, just when we thought perhaps we had that behind us, in comes the pandemic and all things related to it. So it certainly has been an interesting 6 years as we think over the time. The organization over that same time period has gone through a fairly major transformation. So we replaced our core banking system. So the location where all of our client transactions are stored, we switched that out. We moved from essentially paper-based lending underwriting system to one that is completely digitized. So being involved in the transformations that's required to support an organization through that kind of technology transformation has been really exciting. And today I oversee finance, treasury, strategy, corporate development, investor relations, legal, regulatory compliance, and the newest one is sustainability. So one of the coolest thing about my role as CFO is that there's nowhere in the organization that you can't go, right? Other than the CEO, we're the one with the broadest purview. And so we're involved in every piece of it. And as I think back, I think there are times in your career where you look back and you realize that there were pivotal moments. And I think for me, a couple of those, one was back in my days of Deloitte, I was out to do an audit of a pulp mill. And we walked in to start the audit and they had just promoted an engineer to lead the finance team. And I remember thinking, what does an engineer know about finance, right? And it was interesting because during that audit, I learned exactly how you go from a tree in the woodland to either lumber or pulp at the other end, and how all of the costs flowed through from the start to the end. And really was left with the realization that the numbers don't tell the whole story, that you really have to understand the business for the numbers to make sense and for you to turn data into information. And at the heart of it, much of our role is sharing information. What does the story mean? Why does it matter? What actions do we need to take about that? And one of the other ones came a few years ago when my youngest son was checking out universities in the US. And he was there for a recruiting weekend, and a second-year student sort of asked him and another recruit what they were studying, and they both said they wanted to study business. So that was the first the mother had heard, so that made me kind of happy. And this second-year student, full of worldly knowledge, leaned back and said, I started in business, but I didn't want to be an accountant and I didn't want to be a banker, so I switched to communication. And I started to laugh and I said, you guys won't believe me, but I'm an accountant and a banker, and pretty much all I spend most of my days doing is communication. So it's just been interesting to think about how your career shifts over time. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And that just ties really nicely into what we had been discussing as well around how the CFO role isn't just numbers. And over time it's evolved into more and more, and we are continuing to see it to evolve even more. So you really are that partner at the table that has their kind of hands in everything, because in order for you to really be able to talk about the numbers and strategize, you need to understand how all the numbers are coming together and why, and all the business and operational reasons behind it. So really, really key role in an organization, and really interesting role, and something that I think a lot of people maybe just get stuck on the numbers part and don't necessarily see. So I thank you so much for all of your insights, and again, welcome. So now I'd like to jump into some questions. So we are going to start off with the first question today. What do you feel is the top priority for today's CFO? For example, the design and execution of our organizational culture is critical in any environment, and we did touch a little bit on that in some of the initial comments. Now, do you see things like this changing in the current environment? And just taking this one step further, can you give an example of something your organization needed to pivot on or do during the last several months? And do you see this as an ongoing and evolving change? So I know a bit of a big question, lots of parts to it, but really looking at priorities and what do you see changing and evolving, and particularly, you know, over the past, let's say 6 months that we've been going through this pandemic, what do you see, you know, really moving forward? And Michelle, would you like to kick us off on this one?
Oh, I'd love to. Thank you. It's funny. It's like a roulette thing. Who is Evangeline going to ask this question to? We're on our toes. Thank you very much for the question. I say the top priority, certainly when I think about that question as the senior finance person at Norquest, I say it's taking that strategic leadership all the way through to long-term financial viability in some cases, sustainability in others. And that to me is top priority today, and probably always should be top priority actually. And what I mean by that is really thinking hard as an organization and as a CFO in an organization on what strategically do we need to pivot on today, most especially since COVID. Is it the same, is it not? And how does that lend itself well to long-term financial sustainability? And it's a difficult question to ask and answer because in the middle of a pandemic that we've not had before, and you think about the businesses that we do and the customers that we serve, we all have them. It's customer behavior, it's what customers' needs are. And I think as a society, we're still relearning what are our needs, what is going to stick, what is going to change. So because all of that is questionable as businesses, we have to have our ear to the ground, we have to engage, we have to collaborate, we have to re-engage around why we're there, even at Norquest, who are our students and what do our students' needs, what are our students' needs. One way we pivoted very quickly, we're college, we're post-secondary, we're in education. So we pivoted within days, going from face-to-face learning into online virtual learning. And you know, when you do that as a college, we do it because we had to. So was our curriculum set for online learning? No, it wasn't. It was face-to-face curriculum that we pivoted hard to. How can we get our students to their end game this year, which is successful graduation? Now we pause and say, now how do we pivot our curriculum to something that actually does look like online, should our students continue to want to choose online? You know, what I learned about us is how passionate we are as Norquesters for our students, faculty members that dug hard into how do I do this virtually, IT group that put out laptops to our students who are in a you know, in a population that may or may not have technology at home. We actually delivered laptops in some cases to our students' homes to help, because we really sunk into the success of our customer who is our student. And I was proud of our ability as Norquest to be nimble around that. And then now how do we keep that? How do we keep that mindset up and running? And how do we pivot our strategy go forward? So I think I ask a lot of questions, but you say, what is the top priority? The top priority is strategic leadership and who we are, all the way through to long-term financial sustainability for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And yes, and so certainly, like you mentioned, the sustainability, the strategic planning, but I really liked your reference to the end customer, and really that's driving everything. Which I think again kind of lends itself to our conversation about how your role is really about, again, how do the numbers work to make it work for the end customer at the end of it, and part of all the processes and structure and all of that goes with that. So thank you so much for that. Colleen, what are your thoughts?
Yes, thanks. You know, it's really interesting because Michelle's comments around that long-term sustainability or viability Obviously, from a healthcare system perspective, with we've been through over the last few months, that is absolutely top of mind. So having finance and the CFO there for all of the conversations, and inside Alberta Health Services, we are for sure. The finance team is at every table that's talking about what we need to do going forward. There was a lot of effort done by Alberta Health Services early on in the pandemic around personal protective equipment and getting enough personal protective equipment, finding it wherever we could. We were fortunate enough to have a great supply chain group, and they were on top of it early on. So we had the ability to share with some of the other provinces. But I think that the idea as we move forward around sustainability and really looking carefully at what we're choosing to do, why we're choosing to do it, that we really need to going forward, that makes the most sense. As a government funded organization, we also are very cognizant of the situation that the province as a whole is in. And when we are out there responding to the pandemic, we are looking to the province as well to support us through that. So need to be careful with all of that as we move forward. As this idea of, Alberta Health Services is great in that crisis response. What I have seen, we did that very well. As Michelle talked about, IT teams helping people get laptops and working from home. But we were not a work from home predominant organization. And so that will be a real change for us in how we do this going forward, and how much we will come back to the office predominantly, or how much we will work from home, and how we have technology do more for us than it might have done in the past. So really keeping an eye on that. A new thing that came out, I think just last week, is the texting of lab results on COVID testing. So texting of test results for us, never done before. So it's that idea of keeping in mind what you can do now differently than you've done before, and can you, as Michelle talked about, carry on and find those other things that can also be done that way.
Perfect. Yes, thank you. And yes, I think especially on the technology side, I think a lot of organizations through this 6-month or so period have certainly seen what's possible, what hasn't worked. I know even at Robert Half, that's been our case as well. And we are going to change moving forward based on what we've learned. So I think a lot to be learned from this pandemic, as much as it hasn't always been a great experience on other fronts. But again, thank you very much, Colleen. So Carolyn, did you want to give us some thoughts?
Sure, thanks. I think one of the things that I've realized as we've been managing through the pandemic and all that came with it was that a big part of our role is to help the organization both survive and thrive. And that has been a continual shift from immediate short term to longer term, and being able to pivot very quickly between which one you're focusing on. So I think in these times, I think for any organization, number one is cash flow and leverage, right? That was what Mike talked about in his introduction. And certainly in times of stress, that always comes back to the forefront and a primary responsibility of the CFO. I think in particular, because both of those things impact organizational resilience, which for me is the ability to both manage challenges and take advantage of opportunities, because we know that in times of economic volatility, opportunities are created. So I think that's one of the most important. And then the other one is strategy, which is consistent with what both Michelle and Colleen have touched on. And for me, and we pivoted on our long-term strategy? Not really, but certainly we've pivoted on the short-term immediate priorities and the like. And as I think about strategy and strategic planning and thinking about how we execute, I often come back to, there's 3 questions that our board chair always asks when we talk about strategy. And his 3 questions are, is it realistic? And the CFO has a big part to play in actually assessing whether the plans being put forward are realistic. Do we have the resources to execute? Again, part of that, is it a reality? And then the last one depends on what kind of organization you work in and who the stakeholders are. But as a public company, it's what's the size of the prize, and does anybody want to buy what you're building? You know, and so again, those three things keep us grounded as we think about assessing strategic choices. I think organizational culture remains critically important for every organization. It is how we show up to our clients, our students, our patients, our customers, in all of those things. And so for us, the things we pivoted on very quickly with COVID, the first one was absolutely work from home. You know, like the other organizations, our business continuity planning only anticipated that 30% of our team members would be critical people who would need to work from home. So within about 3 days, we pivoted and have 85% of our team working from home. We were probably similar to AHS in, not to the same scale, but we realized very quickly that we had our retail branch presence who were essential services. And then we had everyone else. And so we were asking very different things of those who were frontline remaining open to the public than we were asking of the rest who could go home and with some inconvenience, but do their job from their kitchen table or their home office. So thinking really carefully about the safety of our people and our clients was critically important in those early days. We also completely ramped up our communication strategy, our internal communication strategy, because we felt strongly that it was always better to have more information out to our teams rather than less. So blogs, our CEO started doing an every Monday morning video that we're still doing today. The rest of us executives take turns every so often, but we're still doing that monthly touch point. And within about 2 weeks of the lockdown starting, we pivoted our communication to mental health. So to help team members know what the resources were if they were feeling overwhelmed working from home, to help managers think about how to best engage with remote team members. And so that's been something that has continued for us, through to today.
Perfect. So, you know, great additions to the conversation around strategy, and you focus on the strategy, the culture, and communication, and all very, very key points to the CFO role as a whole, and particularly challenged during the past 6 months. So thank you so much for your comments on that front. And Mike, would you like to share your insights?
Sure. So whenever I talk to my team, my direct reports, I always talk to 3 priorities that I've taken in all of my different environments. One would be building a financing strategy that aligns with the business strategy. And it sounds a lot more complicated than it is, but it actually just speaks to ensuring that the company has a strong balance sheet, that we have committed financing, and we have access to capital. And said another way, and kind of goes back to Carolyn's comment, it's making sure that we have cash to support the business. So it's all about having that liquidity. So that obviously is a key priority. Second is table stakes for most CFOs. Make sure you have timely, accurate financials that are transparent, that your stakeholders are getting. And then the third is all about identification and management of an enterprise risk management framework that you're managing. So I always take those 3 in all of the different environments I've been in, and I overlay that with the environment I'm in, and you begin building sub-priorities below it and make sure your people understand what the priorities are. In the current COVID environment, everything shifted to number 1, which was all about make sure you have access to capital, make sure you're talking to your bankers, make sure that you have ample liquidity. And if you didn't think that's what your priority was, your investors were going to be letting you know that that's your priority. And so everything we did from the get-go, we had actually just completed our Q4 release in March. It was actually March 13. I was about to start on my vacation because it was like, okay, now we're moving and we're like, everything, life is going to go well. And immediately got into like daily calls on the Sunday because COVID had basically hit us. And within a week, actually within a couple of days, we'd already called the banks, started having discussions with our lead bank, and then had a much more broader call with the syndicate on the phone. And we didn't have a lot of information, but it was really conveying to them what it is that we did know and how we were thinking about cash, how we were thinking about the actions we were going to be taking. And we let them know that, hey, we're going to be coming back to you in a couple of weeks, and we're going to be putting an ask for giving ourselves more covenant room. And we just come off negotiating our credit facility, but we literally had to crank out a forecast based on, our auto sale is going to be coming down by 80% or 50%. And we were trying to get a lot of our data from our OEMs in China. And so you really are creating this worst case scenario of how are you going to be impacted. And from that, as my phone is ringing, from that, you pull together your best case, your most transparent view of where the business is going. And our bankers appreciated that because they're there to support you. They know that we didn't create COVID. They know that we're doing all the right responsible things, and it was all around liquidity. So our first action was all around, manage our banks, make sure we have absolute covenant room to absorb whatever shocks we're going to be absorbing with the system. As it turns out, we were way too pessimistic in terms of how the business evolved, which is a great thing because you have that much more room. And then beyond that, you get, and I talked about working capital earlier, you get into rolling up your sleeves and you're looking at how quickly are you collecting. So you try to collect a little faster. More importantly, where you have more control is how fast are you paying. And it's about communicating to the people that you're paying, you will get paid. But if you thought we were paying you in 30 days or 40 days, no, we're going to pay you in 45 or 50 or 55 or 60. But don't worry, we're good for it. We're going to pay you. But it was managing liquidity and ensuring that we could absorb any kind of a shock. And we were maniacal on that. And to some degree, we're still maniacal in terms of managing our debt level. And what's helped us is, again, being a public company, our stakeholders have focused on where is your debt and what are you doing in terms of generating cash. And through the COVID downturn, we've actually generated cash. So we've actually generated free cash flow. And so I think that's helped the view of how we're managing the business. But number one answer is liquidity. Manage ample liquidity would be number one priority in this environment.
Thank you. And further to that, again, talking about the strategy piece for sure. So thank you for all your insights on that first question. And now we're going to move to the second, which is, what is one thing you have learned and realized about your business or organization because of COVID? And I think we may have touched a little bit on that in the first question, but maybe expand a little bit on that. And what is one thing, business or personal, that you want to retain after life returns to what we'll call the new normal? And Colleen, did you want to start us off on this one?
Yes, thanks. So I think the question about what is the one thing you learned through it. So I wasn't with Alberta Health Services when COVID first hit, but I will say that I believe the organization reacted to the crisis in a way that was unbelievable. And I do think that that as an organization, we are very good at that. Putting together the teams, there was always a crisis response. This one a bit different because it was across the whole province at the same time, where we would have had crisis response previous that would have been more localized and they had ability to move patients around. So this one was a bit more of a challenge for the organization. Had to come up with what things we were going to put on hold, what services would be postponed for a period of time to be ready in case the worst case scenario that might have happened or we saw happening in Italy ended up happening here. Thank goodness that didn't happen. And now as the organization is ramping back up, it is interesting that it is easier. I heard somebody make the comment that it is easy to shut things off quickly, not as easy to restart them quickly. And that is the case for us as well, especially as you are still in the pandemic and needing to staff for those things around the pandemic. So there will be this ongoing need that the organization will test out different muscles about what resources and how do you get resources that you need to be able to respond to the health crisis that is happening, or the pandemic, as well as carry on regular business. So that is the piece that I think the organization will be in a learning mode on. For myself personally, it's really interesting. Before we started the webinar, we were having a side conversation about travel. And so I think one of the things that I am missing in this pandemic is that inability to travel or to even plan my next trip. So I think what I will learn from this is to not take that for granted, and to really appreciate those times when you get to get away and head to a beach, especially when we hit January, February this year. I will remember that. I think that's
Perfect. Thank you. Yes. I think it's going to be hard for a lot of us come January and February if we can't travel to somewhere warm. We're going to have to create beaches in our house or something like that. Yeah, so thank you very much, Colleen. Carolyn, did you want to speak next?
Sure. One of the things that we've come to realize, we have all organizations do, and I think the larger you are, the more structure you have around project management, organizational change management, delivery of projects. And I would say in a pre-COVID world, for us to do a new product in 6 months would cause great celebration, right? Probably 12 or 18 months is more realistic as you work your way through all the different bits and pieces and schedule it in the timeline, all of those things. We pivoted to rolling out payment deferrals to our lending customers in about 3 days. The process, the training, everything we needed to do that. And then the government lending programs that were available and facilitated by the banks took 6 days to roll out. And we still covered off organizational change management training, the forms and everything that needed to go, focused on the operational risk areas in 6 days. So you sort of have to ask yourself, I don't want us to be operating under that level of intensity in perpetuity, but we can be really nimble. So how do we retain an absolute laser focus on what is critical and most important to do in one order, and how do we keep that in the future so we can continue to be more nimble and roll things out more quickly, is one thing that I want to keep. And the other thing that I've seen that I really want to keep is that we have seen in a different way than in the past the recognition that it's okay not to be okay. So to talk about mental health all the way up to the CEO of our largest companies, who are prepared to stand in front of their employees and in front of the public and say, you know what, I'm feeling overwhelmed, or this has been my personal mental health journey, and let me tell you about how I utilize the services in our organization that you have available to me. And I think it has moved us forward. We've made good strides with the Let's Talk campaigns that have been in place for 10 or 15 years, but I really see a difference, and I think it will stick, that we can have those conversations. We can talk about, and I found with the team that works for me directly that if I was prepared to talk about that, it's Friday afternoon and this week has felt really, really dark and really, really heavy, then they opened up and we had some really good and meaningful conversation and helped each other manage our way through. So that's something that I hope we keep.
Yeah, and that's a really, really good point. I've certainly noticed that as well. And just even people being forgiving in meetings. When things don't go quite right and your child pops up or your dog, pops in, or maybe not as prepared as you should have been. I definitely see that, that people are just being a little more forgiving overall, and having that mental health piece is so, so big. And I too hope it continues as a learning that we can continue to do moving forward. And you speak a lot around kind of necessity creating that innovation and that ability to expedite things. And I know certainly at Robert Half, we've seen that with a lot of our clients across the board, and even with our own organization. So certainly taking bits and pieces out of that, but again, not necessarily trying to do things in 3 days moving forward, because that is a bit intense. But you certainly learn how you can do things quicker and maybe more efficiently. So again, thank you so much for that, Carolyn and Mike. What are your thoughts?
I'd say a common theme is speed. The learning for, I think for me and for a lot of people, were how fast we were able to act. So if I think about operations immediately set out all these, to identify all these action plans and what are we going to be doing. And for us, we had to look at our variable cost structure and, you know, who do you lay off and that, and who wants to be laid off, because there were health issues here. So people kind of put their hand up and said, I got to go. I can't be here and I can't even work remotely. So there was a whole component of ops that, you know, went at warp speed in terms of how they were going to be managing the business and getting ready for how bad this was going to be. I think for finance, you know, I'll touch again about how we galvanized around the liquidity aspect and made sure that we were improving our processes over looking at AP. Like I never would look at an AP register. I was now looking at an AP register, and we were having meetings around what are we releasing, what are we not releasing, even though we were fine, but it was a matter of setting the tone. So it was processes that we put around liquidity. And then a surprise for me was I didn't think we can actually within finance work remotely. Like I would have pegged it to a few people in terms of who can work remotely. And within a day or 2 days, everybody, IT had helped in terms of getting laptops to people who didn't have computers at home. And everybody from finance worked remotely. So ops stayed in the office. So they had more room to move around. They needed to continue to work with each other. They were supporting people in their dealerships because their dealerships remained open. And then you had people in the finance group, and I think some of the HR group and some of the other groups were working remotely. And now I never would have used Teams video. And so now you're using Teams video and you're doing all these calls. You actually realize you're working more. Like you kind of think, some people might think it's a holiday, but it's like you're not traveling. So you're working immediately and you're kind of working through snacks, you're working through lunch, you're working through whatever. And you got to learn how to turn it off. So, but I was actually quite impressed, and we've actually carried that across. So now within finance, if somebody wants to work a day, like on a Friday or a Thursday or a couple of days and work from home, whereas before it would have been a bit more of an outlier request. Now it's like, you do whatever you need to do. You got to manage your, you know, I'll kind of speak to the whole mental component to it, but you got to manage your mindset. And so I'm glad we're more knowledgeable about knowing that we can work remotely and that we can support the business. So that was one aspect. And we talked earlier before the call, before this started, of how we had I was part of a conference yesterday and it was all remote, and you're doing it by video, whereas normally you're on a plane and you're having meals and you're meeting with all of your investors and so on, and how life changes. I think personally, what I know and what I would, and I've conveyed to people is, you know, COVID has taken a toll on everybody, and you could be having a business discussion, and I'll kind of, and yeah, they look at CFOs sometimes as cold and hard, or maybe they look at me as cold and heartless and whatever. And I'll convey to people like, hey, there's stresses that are evident on everybody, and everybody's got it, and you don't necessarily have to show it, but you're living it at home because whatever's going on at home, and you're living it with, like, everybody's life has changed. You're not talking about vacations. You're not getting out. And you're doing the job, and you're worried, like, depending on how this kind of plays out, and you're worried about your health, because it may not be about you, but it may be about who do you impact if you actually get COVID. So I think I'm certainly more aware of that element, and I'll continue to remind people that, you know, if you have to be home, whether it's for your own health issues or you're trying to protect people around you. And I think it was key when I talked to my group, you know, people have to trust that we're aligned with their concerns. And there's no way we're going to second guess anybody if they need to be home, or they're not going to work, you know, they're concerned about something, or they just have to be home from a childcare perspective. You know, we had that a few times where it was like, just don't even think about it. Just, you know, make sure that you're able to work from home. But I think it's key. I mean, I do believe and I talked to bankers and we talk about different organizations. I think relationships will be frayed when this is all over, because you'll have groups that potentially were not allowed to work remote because of what they do. And you'll have other groups that were allowed to work remote. And there's a reckoning. And that day of reckoning, either it's happened or it's coming or we're getting in front of it. But there's that whole, mental health piece that we just need to be, aware of. So those are my thoughts on that.
Yes, thank you. Yes, so again, the mental health piece, absolutely. And that will certainly continue on as we, create this new normal, whatever that's going to look like. And so further to that, the remote work. I know a lot of organizations now are assessing, what is our organizational structure going to look like from that perspective moving forward, because they have seen where it works. And they never thought of that before. So it certainly offers different options. So yes, thank you so much for that. And Michelle, did you want?
Thank you. I would say for Norquest, the pivot that we did with COVID really challenged us around, do we have our culture direction and our cues and the values by how we live at Norquest? Do we have it about right? It was actually a test, I think. So a year ago, we spent and invested a large amount of time putting a statement around our purpose and the culture of who we are at Norquest and why we're here. And our statement starts with, at Norquest, we transform lives. And you think about our students and the lives we transform, as well as our staff and our faculty members and folks who work here. And our statement ends, we have a little bit of a storyboard in between, is we're on a quest, we are difference makers, we are Norquesters. And then you insert COVID. And you say, well, what happened there? So how can we be difference makers? How can we transform lives? What does it now look like for our students, for our staff, for the community at large? And it was a sort of a moment of truth, I think, if you will, around our culture. And then, on the other side of who we are at Norquest, we have our 9 Qs, the values by which we live. And some of them, I say, we're dependable. We start small, we think big, but we're going to try, we're going to find a way forward. And I look at those 9 Qs and I pick them up and I say, what happened in COVID? Whether we're talking about when we instituted our emergency operations committee early, and where we still have our EOC in play and an incredible group that does incredible work around, how do we run as a college and a campus. Whether we're talking about the finance group that flipped from paper-based to dashboarding. We dashboarded in 3 months. In a normal scenario, to your point, Carolyn, the speech of contribution, and yours, Mike, and yours, Colleen, it's we dashboarded in 3 months, ideated, executed, and pushed it out in 3 months. And whether we're talking about our facilities group who are taking care of our physical campuses and now trying to find a way to do that virtually, because all of us went virtual, and we all had that perspective of supporting our faculty members to teach our students, and what do we do virtually. In the middle of that, our year end is in the middle, right in the middle of that. So we did an audit virtually. We did our internal audit function and our external audit functions virtually. Now that was also an interesting pivot. So we look at all of these things, and even our customer experience group thinking about how do we provide that student experience in a virtual environment? What about libraries? What about career discussions? And so we've gone through all of that now. Now I was really intrigued at how we did that at Norquest in such a nimble way. We're a medium-sized organization. We're not too small and we're not too big. So I find that size of organization quite good at being nimble and thinking about how to pivot. Now we say, what do we want to keep? What should we keep? What makes sense to keep? What do our students want? What do our staff want? Certainly from a staff perspective, we've already asked, and we've already put through flexible work style environment. And we've asked every single 1,000 Norquesters, we're 1,000 strong here at the college, how do you want to work? Do you love campus? You must come back. You can't wait for the vibrancy of campus, regardless of the work that you do. Or do you really want to remain working virtually? And can you do that in the roles you have? We ask people to choose for themselves. And yeah, sure, there's good conversation. In my group, I have business enterprises. So we have front-facing folks in the retail store, in the bank, et cetera. So you sure have good conversation on, do you like your job customer facing, face-to-face? What does that look like for you to be on campus? But we had a large number of folks saying, I want to continue to work virtually. And our challenge around space planning stopped being a challenge in the moment of the pandemic. So, there's some pluses, right? So we're challenged around what do we do with our space? We need more space for our students. Suddenly we're like, oh, now we've got lots of space for our students. Now we need funding to renovate. So, because our staff members want to work from home. And I really think for us, we're leaning into that point that I think Colleen made. It's very hard to restart something. So what do you want to keep, because this is the moment that you can do it. And ask people. Everybody has very different lives. So to the personal part of your question, Evangeline, about myself personally, I'm a mom of 2 elementary age kids, grade 3 and grade 6. That is a thing in itself. A husband who works out of town, and I am leaning hard into a flexible way of working. You find me at campus today, but I do enjoy the virtual ways of working, and I'm going to lean hard into that because it works for my life. It doesn't necessarily work for everybody. So I think we need to find our way to be authentic in our own lives, right? And find our way with work and find our way with peers. And everybody's story is going to be uniquely different. So I, for myself personally, want to continue to be a mentor in that vein, an advocate in that vein, and have my listening ears on very, very hard to that notion of personal health, whether it's mental, physical, or for everybody, or how we work. But I am looking forward to moving on, not back, both as an organization and as a executive at Norquest as well. Great question. Thanks for the question.
Thank you. Well, and again, talking about the mental health and to your point, physical health as well, and how, perhaps again, coming out of this, some of the takeaways and things we can change moving forward is, and the opportunities are having those flexible schedules to help people have better mental health and physical health moving forward. So again, thank you all for your responses to that question. And now our third and final question. And very much one I'm sure a lot of the participants are looking to hear from is, when thinking about your path to becoming a CFO and considering the changing world of business and life, what advice would you give to aspiring CFOs? And Carolyn, did you want to kick us off on this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So I came up with 4. So first one was that I think being a really great accountant probably got me to VP Finance. Because in a bank that has a VP Finance and Chief Accountant title, so that was all about sort of the accounting side. I think to continue on from there up into the CFO role took being a really good leader and strategic thinker. So it became less about the underlying accounting knowledge and skills that brought me to that level, and more about other more broad thinking skills. Second would be surround yourself with really great people, and people who are smarter than you are and can take your job, right? That is so freeing, because if I have people who are ready to step up, then I can look at doing other interesting things that challenge me. Third one is step up and volunteer for cross-functional projects, things that take you out of your comfort zone, out of your silo, and help you look at an organization very, very broadly. One of the things that I do as I watch for emerging leaders who I think have the ability to go far is I watch for people who bring not just their silo knowledge, but think about the organization as a whole. And so when I see those traits, I know that that person probably can think more broadly. And the last one for me is give back to your community. Find something that you're passionate about and give back. Use your skills and talents and energy however you think best. As I think back, Michelle's comments are near and dear to my heart. I chair the board of MacEwan University, so post-secondary is something that I'm really passionate about. But in my volunteer work, I have met great business and community leaders who've become my mentors and helped me learn how to navigate organizations and be really thoughtful. I had opportunities to work on strategy and organizational wide priorities long before I had the opportunity at the bank. And I think the other thing that volunteering did for me was it helped me understand that not all the success factors are financial metrics. So that success does not just mean earnings of this or EPS of this, but there are far more nuanced ways of thinking about what is our purpose, how do we add value, and who are we doing it for? So that would be my advice.
Perfect. So beyond the numbers is a big part of that for sure. And absolutely the giving back. I know I can certainly relate to being on some non-for-profit boards, and I've been exposed to things that I would never get the opportunity to do in my day-to-day job. So the learning and the people you meet is amazing. So thank you so much for that. And Mike, what are your thoughts?
I would say for people who are aspiring to be CFO or senior executive, put yourself in a learning environment. When I was I go back to my days at Pepsi, and I was surrounded by people, and I was a planning manager. And I was surrounded by people, whether it was the president or the VP of this or the VP of that or the CFO. And in my world, they were gods. I mean, they were very good at what they did. They were very smart. And it makes you want to be more. It makes you want to think about business differently. There's a monetary component because you actually see how successful they are as well, but you also see a different perspective of it. And I think that's tremendous. Like, when I talk to people about it, and there are times that people may not find themselves in the learning environment, you aren't going to get it all from books or TV or whatever. You got to try to, you may have to take an action to get out of your job and put yourself into a position where you are going to be surrounded by people that you're going to be learning from. And I think emulation, like I will emulate very positive or very good practices that I see. I'll also I won't emulate bad practices, but I'll look out for the bad practices and what I don't want to be doing. And I think that's a big component of, trying to move forward in your career. The other piece I would bring up is, have an opinion. You're not going to go anywhere. And I would always say this to people when I do town halls, have an opinion, don't be a bystander. If you truly want to move your career forward, never saying, and I get the shyness or whatever, but find an opportunity to reach out. And I love it when people would reach out and go, hey, can I grab 15 minutes of your time and find out how you got to where you got to and your career and whatever. It takes guts to do that. And it sends a signal to your supervisor and to me that you want to do more and you want to learn. You're a learner. And so that's a key piece. You need to be a learner. It's not going to happen to you. You have to make it happen for yourself. And there's a luck component in terms of being in the right spot. I always come back and I tell the story to my folks. I come back to a story of when I was traveling and this was in Vancouver, and I traveled a bit, and we were based in Vancouver, and I had to host the president coming from Canada, and this was with KFC, and he was visiting restaurants all around Victoria and Vancouver, and so we were getting on fair trains, planes, automobiles, like all that stuff, and we were waiting to fly off to Victoria, and it's just me and him. And I love this guy. This guy was the most charismatic leader I've ever worked for. And he pulls out a newspaper. And I'd pull out, this was in the day when you look at newspapers and not iPads. And I start reading something and I just kind of like put it down. I was like, what am I doing? I love this guy. And I never just talked to him. And his name was Dennis. And I looked over at him like, Dennis, how did you get to where you got to? And the one thing people have to understand is when you ask maybe more senior people, they love talking about themselves. They do. We all do. And somebody asks you how you got to where you got to, you'll talk for 20 minutes or half an hour, whatever. And then he went on with this story about how he started as an engineer and then he moved into this and he enjoyed business and Pepsi provided him the opportunity. And, I was energized by his story, but it taught me, and I tell it to my nieces and my nephews, like when you get a chance and you're next to somebody, doesn't matter how high they are or whatever, ask them how they got to where they got to. No one's going to get mad at you if you ask that kind of a question. And you'll learn something. They'll tell you things they did that didn't work or things that worked for them or whatever. And then, so beyond all that, asking questions, having an opinion, don't be a bystander. put yourself in a learning environment, which could cause you to maybe make a hard choice. You got to let yourself make mistakes, and you got to pick yourself up. So I'll always say that I'll hire somebody who can tell me about their mistakes, as opposed to somebody who only tells me that they've done everything right. You got to be able to make the mistakes, and you got to be able to pick yourself up and dust yourself off, and learn from it, and move on, and learn from it. So that'd be my advice.
Perfect. And yeah, so kind of further again to surrounding yourself with good people, and then learning from individuals that you see as real mentors. And so thank you so much for that. All right, so Michelle.
Yeah, another wonderful question. I would say my advice is, regardless of the role, honestly, when you ask about aspiring CFOs, I think generally is my advice is be known for something. Be known for something, whatever that something is. Be a person that's, whether you're known for being that generalist or whether you're known for something specific about being always dependable, whatever it is, be known for something. I love the notion and advice of say yes. And say yes to me means say yes to that inner voice in your gut, maybe, that's telling you, hey, this job might not be for me, I best try something else. Or say yes to that person offering you an opportunity that maybe you want to say, you want to read the qualification, say, I'm not quite there. You need to say yes and try and get there. Jump. It's a job is really never what's on paper. It's 50% on what's on paper and 50% the human in it. So say yes and be okay with the downside of that, which might be a failure, but it's a learning opportunity. To Mike's point around learning, saying yes and jumping and doing something and trying something is a great opportunity to learn and fail in the process, and then pick up and try again. And I would say my last piece of advice is around value, and always have value at the forefront of your mind. Am I adding value? Am I in a role that's adding value? Am I valued? Am I surrounding myself by people who value me, that get me? And am I adding value? And that's something I constantly ask myself all the time about that value piece. And you need to be able to say, yes, I'm adding value in whatever role you're in. Yes, I can add value in a new role. And yeah, people around me see me as adding value, and I add value to them. So, and surrounding yourself by the right people is key in that point. So my advice is multifaceted, and it's for any role, really, whether you're going for a CFO role or any role that you can think of. But I absolutely lean into the say yes component. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. So say yes and value. 2 points to take from that. Okay, so Colleen.
Well, so many good points mentioned already. Just a couple of others, and I would maybe build a bit on what has been said. I think this idea of really listening, learning the business, not just being the finance person. So really listen to the areas of the business, how your company makes money, or how what constitutes the costs or cost pressures. So really understanding it. The idea, there is a bit sometimes for accountants, they're black and white. And I think there's some of learn to be okay in the gray. Learn to be a forecaster, learn that you can be okay with assumptions. You don't need the right answer. I think if you're going to move into those senior roles, in almost any senior role, you need to be okay with not having all the data to make decisions on. So I think that that's really important. And the only other thing that I would add is relationships. You need to, and being known for somebody who is really good at relationships, for treating people the way you would want to be treated, for just being somebody who connects with individuals. I think that's very important.
Absolutely. So certainly living in the gray, which again for traditional accountants can sometimes be a bit tricky. So a skill to learn, and the relationship piece. for sure. And I think as leadership continues to evolve, and I think that's just going to be the whole EQ concept of EQ, I think is going to become more and more prevalent. So, well, thank you all so much for answering the questions, for giving us lots of insight. So now we have about, I look at my, 10 minutes, just turned to 12:50. And so we have some questions from our audience that I'd like to touch on. So the first, and perhaps actually Michelle might be a good person to answer this one. How do you see the CFO in regards to HR, and where is the line drawn?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I actually would say I don't personally do well by living in lines. I'm usually more than my title. So where I don't see pure lines between human resources and CFO roles in this day and age. The number one asset of any organization is people. And to get to our end game, which is always, I think, great service to whomever our customers are, and financial viability and sustainability I talked about before, we have to have all the right people practices and have healthy people and the right people with the right talent, the right leaders, the right balances of internal skills and external skills at the right cost. So that's sort of labor negotiations and all that stuff. So there is a very fine gray line there. I love that word, gray, Colleen. Thank you for bringing that to the table. And we should be very meshed. And at Norquest, we're very meshed. You will often find Laurel and I talking about human resources and how does it play with financial management, financial forecasting. And it's not just the numbers. It's about the health of our people too. The WFA and the flexible work styles project we kicked off at Norquest, we did it together. It was both of us that co-sponsored that project, and we did it for a reason. So I say together, hand in hand, in answer to your question. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Did anybody else want to share any quick comments on that as well?
Yeah, I think that's great comments, Michelle. And I think this idea of working together as an executive team across lots of different initiatives is what's needed. But that HR finance one, you really need to be connected together and work well together. And we're having some of those conversations within AHS right now around this work from home or work from anywhere. I think that's what you mean by that, WFA. And so as the finance person, I just got an email this morning to say, can you come join our group? We'd like to speak to you about ideas and opportunities. So I think very much meshed.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I would throw in as well, like if I go back to the organizations I've been in, the best organizations, you're working with HR, and finance is always going to be seen as more probably heartless. And so it's a great opportunity to work with HR. I always enjoy it. There are financial elements to it as well, and there's the human side. So I love that part of the bit. I get more excited about that part of the business than some of the other parts. So I think there's always a strong partnership between, or there should be, between whether it's CFO or finance and HR. So I would throw that in.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so next question. And maybe Mike, you could kick us off on this one. Do you feel that there will be a need for a COO in organizations sized between 100 million to 500 million in revenue, or CFO and COO will be the same person?
Yeah, I think it can be. I mean, I think every organization is going to be a little different in terms of what the culture is or what the mandate would be for that role. And I don't even know if I would bracket it by the 100 million to 500 million. I think today's CFO is very different than what people may have thought of CFOs 10 years ago or 20 years ago. I think all of us probably have been asked about, do you want to take on either a CEO role or a COO role or whatever? And because I heard the earlier comment, it is the best job, because I actually love the job more than any other job, because I don't have to be CEO. I don't want that responsibility. I don't think I can be a good CEO. but I get to touch everything. I get to look at everything. I get to help all the different departments. I can be people's buddy as they're going through challenges or whatever. So again, I think depending on the environment, it makes all the sense in the world I can see CFOs taking over HR. They could be COO. We can be anything we want to be. If we just, put our hand up and the opportunity is there and you have the resources to do, and you can manage people. The other part about CFOs are generally, you have to be able to manage a group of people, and they're all going to have different styles and different capabilities. And your better managers or supervisors or higher level people are going to be better at figuring out how to be that maestro, the conductor of the orchestra of all the different people that you have to move forward. So, yeah.
Perfect. And just to be able to get to a few more questions, I'm just going to jump in here. So the next one, some comments on technology already have been said, but specifically wondering what people think about AI and machine learning and how CFOs are leveraging this technology. Does anybody specifically want to tackle that one? Carolyn? Excellent.
Yeah, Evangeline, some of the things that we've done is think about, for me, I always talk about internal controls being a foundational piece, right, of any organization. They have to be there or we don't get to do any of the really cool stuff, right? So that foundational piece. So one of the ways that we're thinking about AI and machine learning is what are the repetitive tasks that have to be done, but either, they're integral and foundational, but the people who do them don't really feel like they're adding value, to come back to Michelle's point, right? So we've looked at some of those things. If it's copying information from here into another place, a bot can do that way faster and more correctly than a human, right? You sort of eliminate that human error problem. So we're using it there. We're also using it in reconciliations, so compare this list to this list, and they do that. And so we're working with the team at the University of Alberta and just thinking about what are our pressure points, and then engaging on how might AI help us with that. So it's a really exciting and interesting time, but it's, we've just started with small bits.
Yeah. Well, and we have some of the best minds in that area in our city. So it's good to leverage that for sure. Excellent. So I'm just going to jump to a next question. How are you dealing with fatigue of your teams? Who has been balancing the crisis with continuing your operations? Would anybody like to tackle that one? Michelle? Okay.
Yeah, I'd love to start with that one. At Norquest, particularly in my team, not only have we been dealing with the changes in the post-secondary sector and COVID and funding, and we've got a wonderful new CEO and president. And so, when changes happen and there's lots going on, the team is definitely tired. And the way that we are choosing to deal with it, one, we connect often, and we connect often with every single person. There isn't a person left behind. So if the leaders in the group aren't hearing from someone, particularly in a virtual environment, we go find out, we go learn, we chat. We're very clear in our one-on-ones and our connections. Vacations, sometimes when we're busy in our groups, we say, we're too busy, our work is too important, I can't take vacation. We're really pushing that notion, and we're doing it by modeling it. So even in the most busy times, you will find the leaders in my group taking vacation because you have to, because you should, and because it's okay. Things won't fall apart afterwards. So I think modeling the behavior of take that break when you need it, whenever that is, even if it's in the moment. I can't come in tomorrow for whatever reason. And again, it goes back to mental health, but it's really about modeling it. You have to model the way to take a break and be healthy. Others won't follow if you don't.
Yeah. No, great comments. Great comments. So one last question. We're at 12:59. I know there are additional questions in the queue. So what we'll be doing is reaching out and trying to get answers to these and sending them out to the participants at a later date. So thank you everyone for giving your questions. So last question. Any comments about standing by your ethics during this challenging time? Anybody want to tackle that one?
I
You
will.
might. Sure. Thank
You
you.
have to, you know what, I think you have to be who you are. I mean, you have to, I don't know that I wouldn't differentiate between pre-COVID or COVID. You know, I am who I am. And I always, you gotta, like, I'll tell my people, don't be a victim. You have to believe in what you believe in. You have to look after people if you think things are wrong. And all of us at different times have seen things that are wrong, and you have to actually do something about it or say something about it. And
Right.
I wouldn't differentiate it. I would, you know, I would, you have to stand by your ethics. You only have one thing in this life, and that's your name. And don't muddy your name. I always tell, like, don't lie to bankers, don't lie to anybody, don't, like, look after people. And there are certain rules, but it all comes down to protect your name, protect your integrity. You don't ever want that being challenged.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, especially as a, a professional one, and just as a human being, your name and your reputation are really key. So, and once they're tarnished, it's hard to get it back. So yeah. So I thank you so much for those comments. And that's unfortunately going to have to be our last question. But did want to close by saying thank you so much to all of you for sharing your insights and joining us today. As I mentioned even to you yesterday, I know you're all very busy, so I really, really do appreciate you carving out the time and sharing your insights. I know we've got lots of great comments that have been shared, and we've got additional great questions, which means that you've just, further sparked people to think through some things. So again, thank you so much. And again, thank you to all of the participants for joining us today.
Yes.
We'll be sending out a follow-up email, as I mentioned. And so have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh.
Thank you. Bye-bye.